Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I want you to literally picture the world map in your mind right now. Just visualize it. Today, we're going to trace the United States' incredibly unpredictable 423-year real estate journey. We are looking at how a relatively ignored, overlooked landmass systematically transformed, border by border, into a massive global empire. It's an absolutely fascinating story of expansion, and we're going to watch it all unfold right across the map today. Okay, let's dive into this, because the rise to number one was actually pretty unexpected. Right after Christopher Columbus landed in the Caribbean, North America was essentially ignored for more than a century. Why? Well, the Spanish sent an expedition up north in 1539, but they didn't find any gold or silver. So they completely bypassed all those massive, seemingly useless lands in North America to focus strictly on the southern regions where the real wealth was. Which really begs the question, how on earth did we get from that total dismissal to a global superpower? Here is our visual roadmap for today. We're going to track this shifting history in 5 distinct phases: the ignored continent, taxes and independence, buying the West, a house divided, and finally, building a global empire. Phase 1, the ignored continent. Let's set the stage with the early European land grab. To really understand this land grab, you have to picture how Spain and Portugal literally drew a line right down the middle of the world map. They basically agree that all non-Christian lands on one side belong to Portugal and the other side belong to Spain. And the motivation for carving up the map like that is perfectly captured in this exchange. Columbus comes back from his voyage and tells the king of Spain, "We haven't found the spices yet, but they've got lots and lots of gold." And the king's response? "Tell them to be Christians and bring back that gold." This total obsession with gold drove the Spanish Empire south. Meanwhile, the English were much slower to the game. They waited almost 100 years before finally settling the East Coast, starting with a failed colony at Roanoke and then successfully establishing Jamestown and Plymouth. And this brilliantly illustrates the situation by 1754. The map of North America was heavily lopsided. You had New France claiming the entire middle of the continent, but they only had about 60,000 people. On the flip side, the British colonies on the East Coast had a booming population of over 1 million people. This incredible visual imbalance inevitably led to a massive clash to figure out who really owned what: the French and Indian War. The British, heavily outnumbering the French, won the war, which totally redrew the American map and handed Canada and half of Louisiana right over to Britain. That brings us to phase 2. Taxes and independence, because winning that war left Britain with some seriously huge bills to pay. So Britain looked directly at their colonies for cash. Watch how quickly the dominoes fall here. Step 1. Britain levies heavy taxes to pay for all that military help. The colonists were outraged, arguing that it was completely unfair to be taxed if they didn't even get a vote. Step 2. That disagreement over taxes escalated into a fight. And that fight escalated into a full-blown revolution, leading to the Declaration of Independence in 1776. But even after winning the war 5 years later, the new nation was failing fast. The 13 colonies were basically 13 separate countries united only in name. That brings us to step 3. To fix this failing, loosely connected system, the Founding Fathers created an entirely new federal government with a new constitution in 1789, electing George Washington as the very first president. Phase 3. Buying the West. It's time for some massive expansion. Entering the 1800s, America's exploding population had to look west for real estate. The population was almost doubling every 20 years. The average family had 7 children, and all those kids needed someplace to live. The biggest opportunity actually came from France, where Napoleon Bonaparte was busy conquering Europe. Now, Napoleon initially wanted to build a North American empire, but he really needed to invade Britain. Meanwhile, the Americans desperately needed control of the Mississippi River down in New Orleans for trade. The stars aligned perfectly. Napoleon's advisor told him it would be foolish to sell their largest territory, but Napoleon brilliantly calculated. If we sell Louisiana to the Americans, they will be our friends forever, and Britain will be ours. We will sell it all. The money will fund our war with Britain. The price tag for that strategic pivot? Exactly $15 million. I mean, for that remarkably low number, the United States bought Louisiana and instantly doubled in size overnight. Let's move to and see how this builds, because it's wild to watch how quickly these borders are sketched out. Over an incredibly fast 50-year timeline, through sheer luck, strategic treaties, and military action, the nation just exploded outward. In 1845, the Republic of Texas, which had already broken free from Mexico, was allowed to join the U.S. A border dispute over Texas then sparked the Mexican-American War. Simultaneously, the British agreed to draw a neat line right across the map, handing the Lower Oregon Territory to the Americans. At the end of the Mexican-American War, the United States secured the northern parts of Mexico, and the price they paid to Mexico for this massive chunk of Western land? Another $15 million. And the real estate shopping spree didn't stop there. Just 5 years later, the United States dropped another $10 million for yet another piece of Mexican land. In just half a century, the U.S. had successfully stretched its borders from sea to sea. It's literally like watching a giant puzzle snap together. And once they hit the ocean, they just kept claiming things. I absolutely love this historical tidbit. Americans started finding unclaimed islands out in the ocean. And the government's main criteria for claiming them? Is it covered in bird droppings? Yes, sir. Well, congratulations, son. You're standing on U.S. soil. This was for the Guano Islands Act, which, by the way, is still a lot today if you're ever tired of paying too much for rent and want to occupy an island. Phase 4, a house divided. The internal crisis. While the exterior borders were thriving with the California gold rush and people settling in Oregon for free farmland, an internal crisis had reached an absolute boiling point. The country was deeply and fundamentally split along regional lines over the issue of slavery. In the northern states, slavery was illegal, and many considered it to be a great evil that must be stopped. In the South, however, slavery was an important part of the economy. The Americans had been arguing over this stark divide for decades. This powder keg finally ignited in 1860, when Abraham Lincoln was elected president. Because many in the South believed Lincoln would abolish slavery, most of the slave states separated and formed their own country. This triggered a massive, deadly civil war. Ultimately, the North won, the slaves were freed, and the violently fractured United States was stitched back together and united once again. Phase 5, building a global empire. It's time to shift our focus back outward. Almost immediately after reuniting, the nation went right back to expanding its borders, starting way up in the freezing north. The Tsar of Russia actually wanted America to have Alaska, and the negotiations happened on the exact same night President Lincoln was assassinated. In fact, the American negotiator William Seward had survived a stabbing that very night. But they casually sat down to make a deal anyway. Seward offered around $5 million. The Russian negotiator Stokel countered with, "How about $7 million?" Seward simply said, "Sure." Stokel excitedly replied, "Great, I have approval for $7 million," before whispering to himself, "Man, I should have asked for more money." So, for a final massive price tag of a mere $7 million, the US added the absolutely enormous chunk of Alaska to its map. With the mainland and Alaska secured, America's eyes turned to tropical islands, setting them on a direct collision course with Spain. Cuba was in the middle of a war for independence from Spain. In 1898, an American warship sank in a mysterious explosion. The US immediately told Spain to leave Cuba. Spain responded by declaring war. The result? The US quickly captured Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. This brief conflict effectively brought a definitive end to what remained of the Spanish Empire that Christopher Columbus had begun centuries earlier. So the crucial point is watching how these final geopolitical puzzle pieces lock into place. During that war with Spain, the US also annexed Hawaii for an important naval base. Then, Theodore Roosevelt unexpectedly becomes president and he wants a canal to connect the oceans. When a deal with Colombia falls through, he essentially welcomes a newly formed Panama into existence and builds the canal there anyway. By finishing the Panama Canal in 1914, the incredibly powerful US Navy could now quickly move between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Which leaves us with this final, provocative dilemma that Americans fiercely debated during the annexation of Hawaii. Should a nation mind its own business or its own interests? By answering that question with naval bases, islands, and canals, America had unexpectedly yet systematically transformed from an ignored landmass into a dominant world power, just as World War I was beginning. Thank you so much for joining me on this visual journey through the map.